Hello, welcome to another episode of Moody Coda. My name is Mike Moody, and I have been working as a professional ServiceNow developer for over 8 years. I started working for a managed service provider, and today I work as a lead architect and a team development lead at eBay. And today I wanted to share another sort of performance related topic with you. This is regarding if you have the need or to have a flexible, highly performant asynchronous API call executed from the ServiceNow instance to a target system without having the option or luxury of using orchestration or the new integration hub, then this is a video for you. So what I'm going to show you here, and the goal of this is to be able to create a script include record that where we can define a function that's responsible for doing an API call to a remote system, and then within that same script include be able to define a callback function to continue the flow and the processing of that response call when that response call comes back in the system. So the documentation that's available isn't entirely clear on how to pull this off within with the execute async function on the RESTMessageV2 object. So that's what I'm going to show here. I've already got the code implemented, so I'm just going to kind of walk through this. Before I do, I want to sort of demo the result of what I'm trying to pull off here. So I have this very simple run test function defined here in a background script, basically newing up an instance of this custom script include. And just executing a function called get. So this is going to initiate an outbound API call to a target system. That call is actually a long running job. So it runs about 20 seconds. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait to see the response payload once it comes back in the system is going to be logged here in the transaction log. So I'm just refreshing the system log to see, there we go, we got a response. So let me just zero in on these two. So what we got in response to that get call is we got the parsed response. So this is the data that was sent back to us from the remote system. As you can see here, it's indicated by the message remote system. So this is the information they sent. And then in addition to this, within that same callback handler, we are able to pass back a custom parameter object. So anything that we want to pass along and then have passed back to us later when we get that call back, we can pass along. All right, so this is sort of the end result of what we're kind of build out here. So let me go ahead and walk you through the code and everything that was put in place to make this happen. So the first thing I did is I set up a scripted REST resource within my personal dev instance here. And this resource is just responding to a simple get request call at this resource path. And it's all it's doing is it's introducing a 20-second delay to emulate a long-running process on the remote server. And then it's sending a successful 200 status response with some data that we saw in that log, the remote system and some generic values, and setting that back. So this is set up for the testing scenario. And then the next thing I did is I implemented a script include. Now this script include is implemented as a name of integration util and accessible from all application scopes, which is key, I believe. And then I do have a number of things going on in this, and I'm going to go ahead and walk you through this code. Let me just pull it out of here and put it into my IDE because it'll be a little easier to talk you through in this environment here. So for this script include, I defined that get function that we called from that background script. So what we're doing in here is the first thing is I'm creating this custom JSON object, which is just for going to be providing the callback info. So this is going to specify the callback class. So the idea is that when we get that response from the remote system, I want the system to instantiate a call to the same integration utility. This is the API name for it, which is prefixed with the application scope plus the script include name. And then I want it to call a specific function inside the script include, which is going to be defined down below, which is get callback. Now, if I scroll down, you can see here's that get callback function, which we'll go over in a little bit. So thirdly, I want to provide a custom object. So I want that this custom object to be passed back into my callback function when I get that response back from that remote system. So I set all this up as a custom JSON object. Then I new up an instance of that REST message version 2 object here. I set my endpoint, just hard coded in the script here, setting the HTTP method to get, and I'm setting the mid server to a mid server. Now this is really critical actually, and a key here. The reason why is because what I'm about to do here with the set ECC parameter, this will be of no use if we do not set the mid server value here, because what happens is if you don't set the mid server, you can call these set ECC parameter functions, which will do what they're supposed to do with the outbound call, but the response that you get in the ECC queue is not going to contain this data. It's going to be lost. So this is why it's important that when you're using this method to definitely leverage a mid server to make that REST API call. So proceeding on, what we're doing is we're looping over this custom object, and we're simply using each of these key names as the first parameter of the set ECC function. And what this is doing is it's actually creating a new XML key inside of the ECC queue record XML payload that is going to be used to send this call to the mid server. So, and then the value is being set through the property value of that callback info object. So, and then, so for all three of these, it's going to go ahead and make this call and push that, create an XML entry for them. And then here on line 23, what I'm doing is I'm overriding the XML entry for this object, because we can't put raw objects into the XML payload. They have to be converted to a string. So here I'm doing a JSON stringify of this object and putting that into this third parameter. Now, finally, there's a set ECC parameter for skip sensors true. And so this is important to prevent the system from triggering business rules, other business rules that try to process the inbound transactions in the ECC queue that we don't want to run. So we only want a custom business rule that we're going to implement to run to process that response. So then finally, the last thing we do is we execute the async function off of that REST message, which will immediately execute and insert a record into the ECC queue table, and then terminate this function and let go of that thread in the system. Okay, so now we got to handle the callback. So we define down here a simple get callback function. That function is expecting a parameter object to be passed into it. That parameter object is going to be this third property we defined here in this JSON object called the callback parameter object. It should look just like this when it comes in. All right, so once we go into this function, we're not doing anything fancy here. The only thing I'm doing is just logging out the content that we get from the response. So the HTML, there's a custom response object that's going to be set to the this.responseObject property within the script include. This is being done in the initializer up top. As you can see, it's expecting that this script include can be initialized with the passing in of a response object. This response object is going to have a status property on it, which is going to be our HTTP status code for the call that we made. And this response object is also going to have a response body property, which is going to be the string result of what we got from the remote system. So that's going to be the JSON that the remote system is sending back to us, JSON string that is. So this is a JSON parse to parse it into a JSON object, which then you can use the dot properties off of that JSON object if you want to access specific fields on that object. Alternatively, what I'm doing, all I'm simply doing here is just logging out. Oh, look, we got that JSON object. I'm restringifying it. And then the parameter object, I'm going to stringify that as well so that we could just prove that we received back both the data sent by the remote system in response, as well as the custom parameter object that we passed in. Okay, so that's all we're doing here in this callback function. Now, how do we get that callback function to be called, right? So that's the next step. So what I did after this is it created a asynchronous business rule that resides on the ECCQ table, and the conditions for this business rule, first of all, it is marked as an advanced business rule, and it is set to run asynchronously on insert. And the filter conditions stipulate that the topic is REST probe and the queue is input. So when you trigger or when you use the RESTMessageV2 object to trigger an asynchronous or even synchronous REST call over the mid server, it inserts a record into the ECCQ table with the topic of REST probe. And so that's on the outbound, and then once it's processed, it comes to the input queue with the same topic, okay? So that's what we're looking for in order to catch that response back from the mid server once the call's been made. So once we get that response, this is the script body that we're going to process here, and I'll put this in my IDE and walk you through this code. So what we're doing here, the first thing is I'm newing up an object here to a custom global utils script include that I defined. The purpose of this script include, which I'll show you the functions that reside in that I'm calling, is to allow me to execute functions within global application scope that are not available within our custom application scope. And unfortunately, in this use case, there are some functions we need to call that are not available in our scoped app. So that is why I'm newing up this object. So when we proceed here, we're going to get the response data. That's step one. So we got the response, our custom response object that we're going to pass into our callback function. We're going to get that all set up first and get the response body by using our utility and calling this function get XML parameter. So this is essentially just parsing out an XML key parameter out of the XML payload, specifying what is the payload. So this is the ECC records.payload field, and then that what key XML key am I looking for within that payload. Same thing for status here. I'm going to do a get XML parameter, and now we're looking for the HTTP status code, and we're going to set that to the custom status property here. And then finally, the payload itself, the entire payload, in case we need to do any other processing against that payload, it will be part of that response object. So that's all set up. And then we proceed to getting the callback info from the ECCQ payload. We're going to use the same get XML parameter function called here from our glide utility in order to extract the callback class. And if you remember, this is this callback class, the callback function, and the callback parameter object were all properties that we defined in our script include get function. So if you take a quick gander back at that integration utility, and right here when we define this callback info object, this is where we specified those for the outbound API call. So those were pushed into the XML body via the set ECC parameter calls that we did down here. So now that we're processing and working on the response, we can extract that data from the XML body via this get XML parameter call here and specifying the keys that we're looking for. And that's what we're doing. So we're putting those in each respective variable here, and then also we're creating, or we're doing a JSON.parse of the JSON, the stringified JSON payload for the parameter object, so we can convert it back to an actual object. And then once all that's done, we got these 4 variables. We are executing a function called execute callback function, again off of that globally scoped utility, and we're passing in all 4 of these variables into them that function as parameters. Okay, so that is how you implement the async business rule logic. Now, the real heavy lifting work is being done by this globally scoped utility. There's a couple of functions here that we need to take a look at. So let me go ahead again and move this into my IDE and walk you through the code on this. So the functions that are applicable to this solution are these two here at the bottom. We have the get XML parameter that we were just showing you. And here it takes the payload of the ECCQ record payload field, which is that XML body, and then the value, the target value that you're looking for. And it's going to, this is why it has to be globally scoped, is because this glide XML parameters object is only available within the global application scope and not our custom scope. So this is why we're doing this. And by doing this, we're able to use the functions that exist off of that object to get our data out of the specified XML tags that we need. And then I'm returning that result here, okay? And then the last function here within this global script util is the function that's responsible for actually executing the callback function itself and passing in all these nice, wonderful parameters. So there's a number of things that we're doing in here. The first thing I'm doing is getting the current scope that we're in when this function is executed. The second thing is we're defaulting scope name to global. And then we are splitting from the callback class at the dot in order to determine what is the scope of the script include, which is prefixed in the script include API name and in part of that parameter value that we passed in. And then what is the class, in other words, the script include name, the suffix of that script include that is being split here on the right side. Okay, so we got those two variables set. And then we check to see if callback parameters were provided. And in our case, we did. We provided a custom object. So that means we're going to be in our else clause to process our custom object. But let's take a look at the if side first. So if there were no parameters provided, then basically what we're doing here is just like you would create a new instance of a script include through standard notation, you know, like this is doing something similar, only it's using the index approach in order to allow us to leverage our variables to define that instantiation, or basically we're constructing here the name of the script include, like the fully qualified name of it, and then at the end we're initializing it with the function call, because you can see the function parentheses here, right? And then we're this is actually creating the object. This part here is creating the script include object, and then this latter part here is actually calling the callback function here. It's substituting in those values into the name. So really what this looks like is similar to this right here when it's translated. So let me just show you. So this is how it essentially would translate in the system. So you'd have your a global object within the scripting environment, and then the first property there, or dot property, would be rhino.global, which is specifying the global application scope. The second property would be the application scope that my script include lives in, which is the x8899 testing application scope. And actually, and now I'm sorry, I'm in a sharing application scope. So let me just manually fix this here. This is what I'm demoing in. And then right after that is the actual name of the script include, right? And then that is your the instantiation of the script include object right there. And I'm initializing it by passing in the custom response object that we got from the API call. And then immediately following that, we're executing a function off of this script include object that we're newing up. And that function name is the get callback function name, right? And then that obviously needs its function parentheses as well. And then in that, we're passing in our callback parameters that we passed into the initial call. So that's how this translates when you look at it. Of course, in this case here on line 74, we're not passing in callback parameters because we checked for that. But then so this would actually be empty. But then if you were looking at this in the context of the else side of this if condition, this is what it would look like here in actuality. And since we are passing parameters, this is how it would translate. And so the system's able to read this line here and interpret it as a dynamically call back the target callback function that you want it to call. So that's pretty cool. So we'll go ahead and comment that out. That's basically the implementation of that function. And this is really the key function that makes the dynamic callback magic work. Okay, so that basically sums up how you would go about implementing that. So it's just really those three pieces of code that you need. But with this sort of implementation, this async integration sensor here can handle any script include that you might want to set up that's doing an outbound call and you needed to do a callback to a specific function name. You can totally leverage this just how I did here. Just substitute in your script include name here, your fully qualified API name for your script include, and then your desired callback function within this script include that you want to be triggered once the transaction is received in the ECC queue, and then optional parameters that you can pass in as you saw that you can get and extract on the receiving side. So there you have it. That's what I wanted to share. Hopefully, you might find this useful and helpful for some people out there. If it's useful and helpful, let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions or whatever. You can just post a comment. If you like what you're seeing, you can subscribe. You're welcome to do so. And well, thank you for tuning in and sharing this time. And hopefully this was helpful and useful and you got something good out of it. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.